So I worked for several years at Google trying to protect Google's search results, but today I want to talk about a slightly more complex system than even Google search rankings. It's something I call the federal government. And it desperately needs a tech upgrade. I'm the new administrator of the US Digital Service, which is you might know us from the group of geeks that helped rescue the healthcare.gov website. And our goal is pretty simple. We try to make sure that the federal government delivers the best possible services to the public that we can. We actually celebrated our 3rd birthday recently. We're still around, we're still working on projects that matter, and we're hiring. I wanted to talk to you today about one project that's going really well and that has a lot of impact. It's about trying to make the Medicare system more efficient. Now, if you had come to me a year ago, I would have been like, oh, Medicare? Really? What is that? It turns out Medicare affects 55 million Americans. It pays out over $650 billion a year, which is 3.5% of the US economy. And most of the healthcare industry looks at what Medicare does and often mimics it. So add another $2.5 trillion on, you're talking 18% of the US economy. Now that's just a bunch of numbers. So let me give you one more reason why we need Medicare to work well. This is my dad. I got permission to put his picture up. He just celebrated his 75th birthday last month, but he almost didn't. He exercises every day, but over the July 4th weekend, he had a serious health issue. This is my dad's heart. It turns out he had an 80 to 90% blockage in his left main artery, which I discovered is also called the widowmaker. Now, he's okay. He had heart bypass surgery. He's looking forward to getting back to playing tennis again this week. He had really good coverage at his local hospital in Kentucky, care that was effective and efficient, but not excessive. So getting Medicare right really matters. I hope none of us have to deal with the healthcare system, but probably all of us will, if we're lucky. So the goal is to figure out how we can make Medicare better. Unfortunately, right now, Medicare doesn't really pay for encouraging better results. The more tests you run, the more you get paid. And the more expensive technology you use, the more you get paid. Even if that doesn't really encourage better outcomes for patients. So Congress saw this, and in 2015, they passed a bipartisan law. The idea was simply to pay for patient care, not just for quantity. So they told CMS, which is the agency that administers Medicare, to do 2 things. 1, collect data on what doctors were doing. And 2, adjust the payments based on the quality of the care. Now, what's an example of that? Very simple one. If you get treated in a hospital, do you get readmitted to the hospital within 30 days? By the way, Congress said to start doing this within 2 years. Now, if you have ever built a large system that affects things at a national level, you know that's not that much time. CMS, the federal agency that had also dealt with healthcare.gov, realized that this was going to be a really complex process. It was going to be hard to build in time. And so in January 2016, they reached out to us for help with this program. It's called the Quality Payment Program, or QPP. So what did we do? Well, we all know that being able to move quickly, being agile, means you get better results. You can iterate, you can improve, you can make your software better. But that doesn't just apply to software. It also applies to policy. So we took the policy that people were intending, we actually modeled it, looked at what it would look like for doctors, and tested it with users. That matters because the final rules, whenever they were put into place, were over 2,200 pages for this law. But the difference between just doing a one-shot, get comments, and put it out versus iterating over and over and over again meant that we had doctors who said, you know what, I was thinking of opting out of Medicare, and now I think I still want to stay in it. So trying to be agile really makes a difference. The other thing that everybody in the private sector knows is you basically build products based on the engineers that you have. Well, it turns out government doesn't really have many engineers. So you have to use contractors. So one of the things that we helped do was to put in place a contracting vehicle so that we could buy parts of the system quickly. Once we had that in place, we could actually try to get good contractors. Now, normally whenever you have contractors competing for a federal bid, they write reams and reams of paper. We did something completely different. We asked them to build prototypes. And then we took engineers at the US Digital Service and we actually looked at the quality of their code. That is not the way that government development happens at all. Now, we still have a lot of complexity. We have a double-digit number of contractors. On average, those contractors have a double-digit number of people working for them. So there's a lot of coordination involved. But we're way far ahead of the game because we actually have good contractors that we were able to vet ourselves. Once we had all of that in place, we were able to start thinking about how do we use technology to make things better. So we've been able to help CMS move to the cloud. It's kind of nice. They're actually starting to use continuous integration and deployment. By the way, before, CMS was thinking about building all of their stuff into CMS-owned data centers. Now they're using Jenkins, Ansible, Terraform, and they're building and deploying in AWS. That's a huge change from how government usually works, and it's going to save about $20 million over 5 years. More importantly, it means that we can iterate quickly and we can respond to users' needs and make sure that the system works well. So one last thing that we did is we shifted to an API-first architecture, both internally and externally. Side note, when I was at Google, a few members of the web spam team built a URL shortener called goo.gl. GL stands for Greenland. I wanted Guernsey, but Greenland is what we ended up with. And they ended up building their system by defining the API first, and then they built the front end to goo.gl on top of that API. That's the exact same play that we're running with this bill. So APIs decouple things so that systems can integrate more cleanly. It also makes sense because you've got better communication between systems. And in case you were wondering whether the healthcare market would not respond that well to APIs, we thought maybe a handful of developers would request API keys within the first year. We were wrong. Over 140 organizations have requested API keys, and this program hasn't even officially launched yet. That's over 50% of the organizations in this market. And an API-first strategy allows a ton of private sector innovation to unlock all kinds of good changes without the government having to do it. It's a little like TurboTax, but it's for healthcare. I mean, literally, TurboTax uses an API to the IRS. We're building an API for Medicare. So we've also created plain language websites and tools so that doctors can see whether their Medicare payments will be affected by this program. And the crazy thing about this story is that this is just about as good as it gets. We have a high-functioning team at CMS. We have strong support from our agency partners. They pulled us in early instead of waiting for everything to fall down or be an emergency. So far, a lot of things are going our way. Don't get me wrong. There are a ton of ways where things could still go off the rails. But if you want to hear some more stories about how things, one or more or many more things go off the rails, I'm doing a fireside chat later today with Marian Bellotti, also of the US Digital Service. By the way, I'll also be at a Meet the Experts table and at a Birds of a Feather table for lunch. So if you want to talk to us, please come talk to us. But this is the point where I ask you for a favor. When I was at Google, Larry Page said, one of the easiest things to do is the same thing you did yesterday. But it's also one of the riskiest things to do. If you think back about what you've done in the last week or in the last month, and nothing really meaningful comes to mind, maybe it's time to try something new. I am swimming in nonpartisan, big, hairy, important problems, hair-on-fire problems that affect millions of people. You know what I'm not swimming in? SREs and software engineers right now. Just a few people can make a huge difference. I'd like for you to consider doing a tour at the U.S. Digital Service. Take a few months off, try something new. You can help us with healthcare, immigration, veterans. If you do one thing from this talk, I'd like you to load this URL up, leave it in your browser as long as you want. But later, when you're closing that tab, ask yourself, where can I do the most good for the most people who need it the most? Thank you.